Thank you all for coming. Congratulations to my students for finding the room. I'm very pleased to welcome everybody to our international panel on Holocaust education in Poland today. My name is Susan Crane. I am a faculty member in the Department of History here at the University of Arizona, and it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you. We have some thanks also to address to agencies on campus and off who have helped to support this event today. The impetus in part comes from the Polish Consulate General in Los Angeles, who made us aware of commemorations in Lodz this summer and asked if we were interested in extending the commemorative events into the university and curriculum this semester. So this is where it all began. And then it was also picked up by the Office of Global Initiatives here on campus. And is Dale LaFleur here? I don't think so. I haven't seen her. Dale was instrumental in getting this organized. Thanks also to Beth Nakai, who is the interim director of Judaic Studies here at the University of Arizona, who has been organizing this with me as well. I will introduce each of our speakers in turn when we're ready. Let me make sure I've got all of our thank yous together. The technical assistance from John Winchester and Frank Camp also, thanks very much from the Office of Global Initiatives to make it possible for us to have a truly international panel today with one of our guests participating virtually. Okay, so with due thanks to all concerned, I'm very pleased to introduce our first speaker. What we will do is conduct a panel in which we have 3 presentations. Each of the speakers will be speaking for approximately 20 minutes. And if you could, please hold your questions until after all 3 of the panelists have spoken, and then we will have plenty of time afterwards to take questions for all 3 of the presenters. Our first presenter, whom you can see on screen, is Joanna Podolska, and she is the director of the Marek Edelman Center. The Marek Edelman Center for Dialogue was established in Lodz by the City Council of Lodz in 2010 as a center for cultural and educational research. Its purpose is to organize activities promoting the multicultural and multi-ethnic heritage of Lodz, with particular emphasis on Jewish culture, as well as other cultures which have a significant impact on the city. So I'm going to have Joanna Podolska open the proceedings today, and we thank you very much for staying after hours in Lodz. It's already early evening there, so we appreciate very much that you're with us here today. So please join me in welcoming Joanna Podolska.
First of all, I would like to start with Łódź, with the city of Łódź, and we are in the middle of Poland and in the middle of Europe. The city itself was created in 19th century as an industrial city, as the city of 4 cultures: Polish, Jewish, German, and Russian. And before the war, Łódź was the 2nd largest Jewish community in Europe, and we had almost 700 inhabitants, and between them about 33% were Jewish. So it was very important Jewish community, and the biggest one, of course, was Warsaw. The second was Łódź. Łódź was the industrial city, and so even today you can see a lot of factories, and the Jewish people created the city and had a big impact on the history and the development of our city. And before the war also, it was a very important and rich cultural Jewish life here. You have Jan Pierre painting on the right, Arthur Rubinstein, who was born in the end of 19th century in Łódź, Katz Nelson, who is more connected to Warsaw because he wrote a very important poem in 1943 about the Warsaw Ghetto, but he was living and working in Łódź before the war. So it was a very important Jewish city till 1939. And in 1939, of course, the Second World War started, and the situation completely changed. As I told you in the beginning, it was also an important German city. in Łódź we had about 10% Germans who decided in the beginning of the war that Łódź will be the German city. So it was the part of the Reich. And in the beginning of 1940, in April, they decided to give a new name for Łódź, so it wasn't anymore Łódź, but it was Litzmannstadt. Litzmann, Karl Litzmann was a general in the First World War and a big supporter of Hitler in 1930s. So when he died in 1956, so during the war, Hitler wanted to give the name for the big important city. And they decided, Germans decided to create the ghetto for the big Jewish community in Łódź, and it was one of the first Jewish ghettos created in occupation in Poland, and it was one of the last because it was destroyed and liquidated in 1944. And the Liquidation ghetto was a witness of the tragedy of over 200,000 Jews, not only from Poland, but of course most from Poland, but also from the big cities in Germany like Berlin, Frankfurt, Cologne, from Czech, from Prague, for instance, from Vienna, and from Luxembourg. And in the Liquidation ghetto, or the Łódź ghetto, because as the metro says, Łódź ghetto, Lodz Ghetto, and Liquidation ghetto is the same, it's the name for the same place. And so it was about 200,000 Jews, but also in area of the ghetto, there were camp for the gypsies, Adelman in Austria, and in 1942 it was created in that area, the ghetto, the camp for the Polish kids. So it is important for me to start to talk about it, that you understand how big and how important and how big was this area in Łódź. You have here the map, the plan of the city of Łódź today, and this blue part you have a ghetto area. So it's more than 4,000 meters, so 4 kilometers around. And it was still, you can see a lot of places in this area, and you can see on the right side of a big Jewish cemetery, which is still in Łódź. The ghetto was destroyed and liquidated by German Nazi in summer of 1944. You probably know already that it was in that moment the last ghetto, because all the other ghettos were liquidated in 42 or 43, like in Warsaw ghetto. And in Litzmannstadt, it was still about 70,000 Jews who were working in a big labor camp, which was the Litzmannstadt ghetto. And these 70,000 people were sent in August to Auschwitz-Birkenau, and around 7,000 survived the war. In the ghetto died about 40,000 people, and they are buried in the Jewish cemetery. And it is a big part of the Jewish cemetery in Łódź, which is so-called ghetto field. And in the ghetto field, you can go there and you can see the place. Definitely, the Jewish cemetery in Łódź is one of the most important tracks of the Jewish presence in the world before the war. But also, I wanted to tell you that Łódź after 1945 was completely different than before it, because not only the Jewish community, so big Jewish community, disappeared, but also more than half the Polish citizens disappeared from this place. And also the Germans who are living, about 60,000 Germans who are living before the war in Łódź, left the city. So from these 600,000 people living in Łódź before the war, only about 120,000 people came back. And the other citizens, they were citizens who did not know the history of the city. So they were people mostly from the eastern part of Poland, which was taken by Soviets after the Second World War. So the situation of which was completely new. The people who came did not know about the history before the war. And so we are going to talk today about memory, and which, what is very important for you to understand, was not destroyed at all during the war. Like Warsaw was completely destroyed because of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising and after the Warsaw uprising. It was mostly destroyed, and you can't find many places which you could recognize from before the war. Łódź was not destroyed. The city was not destroyed during the war by Germans, and it's not destroyed by Russians. So you could see a huge Jewish cemetery, and you can see the monuments from before the war, and also this big part of ghetto field where people were buried in the ghetto. So this Jewish cemetery, people who are coming to Łódź could go and talk about the history, and not only about ghetto, but also about the life before the war. I don't go into details, maybe you will have some questions after, because it's not a lot of time. So, as I told you, the city of Łódź, the situation of the city of Łódź after 1945 was so strange, because we didn't have many citizens who knew the people who are living in Łódź before the war. And also the politics, the communist politics, was not to remember about the past. And so for almost 45 years, it was not a lot of publication and information about the history of the city and about the Jewish population. Not only about Holocaust, but also about life before the war. So just after 1989, the situation has changed, and the new generation of researchers, but also journalists and just people who are interested in the history, started to dig the history. And in 2004, it was the big change in the city, because the government of the city decided to create the huge monument. You see a picture, it's Rivka station. It is some kind of Umschlagplatz, because from this place, from this small building, you can see upstairs on the top, the Jews from the Lodz Ghetto were transported from the ghetto to Funhof or to Auschwitz-Birkenau. And the government of the city decided to make a monument on Rivka station, and it is a very important building which was created by the city and together with also the educational program. And the second part of this decision was to create the park, a park which was so-called Survivors Park. It was the idea of the woman who survived the war, Halina Elchevska, who was the survivor of the Lodz Ghetto, who said that it's very important to remember victims of the war, but it would be also important to remember people who survived the war. And she said that let's plant the trees for the people who survived the war. And each tree symbolized the family who survived the war, but also the family, who part of the family was killed. So this Survivors Park was created in 2004, and the third part was to create the place, the dialogue center. So you have here on this plan the idea of the building which was going to be presented. And this, in 2004, about 300 survivors who came for commemorations of the 60 years of the liquidation of the Lodz Ghetto, came to Łódź for the big event, and they planted these trees. Till today, about 600 trees for memory of somebody who survived, and each of these trees symbolizes the family survivors had children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and it is a symbol of victory over the war. So, also in 2004, because I told you that in this area of the ghetto, Nazi decided to create this gypsy camp in 1941, and about 5,000 gypsies were transported from Austria to Łódź. Most of them died, or they were sent to homeland, and they were exterminated. No one survived the war. And in Łódź we have a small place where we can talk about the history of the gypsies. It's very little. It's not many people know about this event, and unfortunately it is a tragic example of a very strange connection of the city of Łódź with the city of Vienna. Unfortunately, Łódź became a symbol of death of about 5,000 gypsies. So it is a memory place for history for the gypsies from the war. In 2009, a few years later, in the Park of Survivors, it was created the Righteous Among the Nations Monument for people who rescued Jews during the war, and mostly for Poles who were rescuers of the Jews during the war. And it is a monument created by the Jewish architect, and you have here on this monument names of Polish families who during the war helped save Jewish families. And also in the area of the ghetto, it was a camp created by Nazi for Polish kids, and this camp was created in 1942, and it lasted till 1945, so till the end of the war in Łódź. And so when we are talking about Holocaust in Łódź, about ghetto area, we are talking also about this part of the history, because it is together just beside on the same area. We have area of the ghetto, and we have these two memorials for gypsies and for. In the Park of Survivors, we have also the bench of Jan Karski. Jan Karski was born in Łódź, in our city. So it is just close to the Survivor Park, to the Dialogue Center. And in this year, in just a few months ago, the Marek Edelman Center building was open, and we are working in this building for last few months. But before we exist last 4 years, and our main reason is to work on memory, to talk about the past, and our base is talking about the multicultural history of the city of Łódź. So we are doing many different events. We are making the concerts, but we are trying to also to put into the concerts. We use, for instance, poetry, which was created in the ghetto, to give people the information about what happened in this place, just beside this park. And we are also doing cultural events, and for instance, in 2012, we made the Polish-Israeli performance, so-called Szpera. I don't know if you know the words. It was Szpera, it was the name for terrible event in September 1942, when the Germans decided that all kids before younger than 10 years old, they should be taken out of the ghetto, and all kids which were younger had to leave the ghetto. This girl you see on the right, it's Rivka Osterman, who is the granddaughter of survivor of the Lodz Ghetto. And we have also in this team the girl who is granddaughter of Jankel Hershkovich, who was the singer in the ghetto, and she is living still in Poland. So there's two artists and some other artists from Israel and from Poland created a very incredible and very moving event in the area of the ghetto. And we were playing, walking through the ghetto together with audience. It was very important movement. And of course we have the commemoration part, which is every year, the commemoration part both on the Jewish cemetery and the gas station. And we have officials, but we have also survivors, and there are children or grandchildren who are coming. And it is also connected to the education part for students or for people who are coming. For instance, in 2013, we did a project, an imagined synagogue, and this synagogue, which was the old Jewish synagogue from 19th century, which was destroyed by Nazi in the beginning of 1939, and we don't have even the place, even the fundament, even any imagination. We have only pictures of this synagogue. So we did a big workshop for young people, for students, together with archaeologists who are digging in the area where should be the synagogue. So we were trying to find the exact place where the synagogue existed. And we did together, we found the places, and this project will be continued. So we are doing it together with students. We did many educational events together with artists who are working with old pictures, for young students, for children who are painting the synagogue. So it was a kind of, we are trying to give to people of the city of Łódź the image of this place where the synagogue used to be and does not exist anymore in this place. We are also doing this big exchange project for young artists. So here you have 4 artists. Each of them is from a different country. So we have the Polish, Jewish, German, and Russian. So as the city of Łódź used to be the city of the 4 cultures. And they were playing together the concerts, and they were playing in Łódź, Berlin, Tel Aviv, and St. Petersburg. And of course, it is education for different levels. It's not only for young people, but also for adults, for seniors, which is very interesting. Very often the young audience know much more about what happened than seniors, but we are working also with different public. We use to talk to young people and to people of Łódź, the people who are connected to the city of Łódź. And I already told you that we have Jan Karski. I hope you know the name. Jan Karski, very important person who was talking about Holocaust in 1942 and 43, one of the first men who was trying to stop Holocaust. As you know, this stereotype expression. But he is very unusual personality to talk about past, about history. Jan Karski himself was born in Łódź in 1914, so exactly 100 years ago. So we are working on his biography to talk about how difficult, how was the last 100 years in Łódź, especially in Poland, in Europe, in the world. So this year, especially, this 100 years after he was born. So we are talking about him. And you have here on the picture the theater performance. We were working with young actors who created the performance Emissary. So they were talking about history of Jan Karski, and they were trying to discuss with him and about what they discovered after his biography. It is the other person which is very important for the history of Łódź, Artur Szyk, who was a painter and artist, and he was from Łódź. His mother and his brother, they were in the Lodz Ghetto. He was during the war, he was in the United States. He was a painter and he was fighting, making caricatures, anti-fascist caricatures, fighting in Israel with Nazi. And we are also talking about his art and about himself. And we are making different kinds of events like exhibitions and lectures. We have meetings with survivors, and of course education in a different level, as I told you before. So the city of Łódź is very, very special because of this history, the Polish, Jewish, German history, and also because we have all these places and tracks you can see today. So we can go there and you can talk about history and discuss it. So we are trying to do it, and we are trying to remember which was many cultures, many city. And so it is, Holocaust is one of our important subjects, but we are trying to talk about past and about how it was before Holocaust, because we think that only when young people or people understand how rich was our life together, they understand what we lose, how important was the Jewish presence in Poland. So it is why I wanted to underline and to tell you all the stories. So I think probably it was more than 20 minutes, but thank you.
Hi, welcome. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm a former 8th grade history teacher in Chicago, and I just am a lifelong educator. So my PhD in international education came out of a deep desire to understand how young people understand the past and why do some teachers choose to teach difficult topics while other teachers don't. First, I wanted to give you a little bit of context about Poland in general. In order to understand Polish people and the Holocaust in Poland, we should start with just what a World War II looks like in Poland. So in Poland, World War II is deeply, deeply ingrained into everyday life. People's identities, family stories, the national identity, collective remembrance is deeply rooted in World War II. You can literally trip over plaques in every street corner having to do with World War II. These are just some examples of what it looks like to commemorate World War II in Poland. I'm a little nervous, but I'll warm up. So this is for the Katyn Memorial in 2010, a photograph of just hundreds, if not thousands of people lined up in front of flowers. Katyn was an event in Poland where about 22,000 POWs were shot and killed by Russian secret police at the time. And this is World War II commemoration. So you see little boys dressed up in World War II era clothing, much like you'd think about the Civil War in the South where reenactments happen. World War II era just sort of parades, young people involved in this event. And as those of you who study history know, political cartoons are often sort of the most interesting example of what a phenomenon of the time. So I found this recently in a magazine. So it's a grandma coming out of the museum of the uprising in Warsaw, and there's a little boy saying, "When I grow up, I also want to die in the uprising." So the idea is, children are sort of inundated with World War II history. And as some memories are on the surface, there are many memories that remain below the surface, or sort of bubble near the surface, but aren't quite out in the open yet. And that's changing now, especially in the last couple of years. But I wanted to give you an example. In 2010, this is already 4 years ago, I went on a search for Treblinka. I didn't have a guide. I should have known. I should have gotten a guide. But we know that, for example, Auschwitz is well marked. You can take a tour bus to Auschwitz. And at the time, Treblinka, which is a death camp that in which Nazis killed about 900,000 Polish Jews, most of whom, not only Polish Jews, but many Polish Jews, most of the casualties there were Polish Jews, many of whom actually lived in Warsaw. So the Jews that lived in Warsaw were deported to Treblinka. It's only 80 kilometers outside of the city. It was extremely hard to find this place. And the sign actually says Museum of Fight and Martyrdom. Once you get to Treblinka, it's changed a little bit, but it's an example of the comparison of this to this. Here's another example in Lublin. This is the site of the old Jewish cemetery, unlike in the town that we just heard about. In Lublin, there is a death camp called Majdanek that is well marked. But the old Jewish cemetery is sort of, there's some kind of a memorial there. It's a little bit abandoned. I actually walked up to this anti-Semitic graffiti, and it's just chalk. So you can wipe it off, which we did, of course. But if it had been upkept, that wouldn't have even been there. So some things are sort of left untalked about. That's not to say Jews aren't talked about, or the memory of the Jews aren't. In fact, there are debates raging in Polish society today. This is a great example of a sort of Time magazine, maybe a little bit of a conservative version of Time, popular magazine in Poland, that came out after both the release of a book that talked about Polish complicity in killing Jews in the Holocaust, and a movie specifically called Aftermath. I don't know if you saw it, which was about Polish neighbors who had taken Jewish property after the war and were very, very hesitant to give it back, to say the least. And this particular magazine claims that how do you ruin Polish memory? Films like Aftermath make dialogue, Polish-Jewish dialogue, more difficult. So some things are hidden, some things are considered too difficult to talk about. It's a very complex place. And so it's in this context that I do my research. So I'll be now presenting to you the research that I do with Polish kids. I speak, read, and write Polish in Poland. The questions that I asked were, how is World War II in general represented in school materials? So the big context. What's taught about the Holocaust in Poland and why? What do students know? The students often pick up on things that adults might not. They have the internet, all sorts of things. They talk to each other. What can this tell us about nationhood and collective memory and history education in relationship to a difficult past? So my complete project was about a 3-year study, although it's still going on, so I'd call it a 5 to lifelong year study. My data sources were about 10 textbooks from before Poland became a free country, before 1989 till after. I interviewed 60 teachers, which is in this publication. What I'll talk to you about today is the work that I did with 188 high school students across the entire Poland. Testimonies from Polish children written after 1945. And now my new project, I'm working on Polish language exit exams where there was a first essay question ever on the Holocaust. It's about Marek Edelman. Actually, the center is named after this man, and the essay question was on him. He was the leader of the Jewish Warsaw Uprising against the Nazis. So take a look at this photograph. It's quite an emblematic photograph for Polish students. They recognize it immediately, and I'm wondering what you see here. Yeah?
What's the name of the guy that was the leader of the war?
Marek Edelman.
Wasn't it Mordechai Anelevich?
He was too. He died.
Yes.
Yes. But he had 2 other partners, I believe. Marek, who became a very important public figure in Poland until he died about 5 years ago, and Mordechai Anelevich. What do you see here? Sure.
His beard being cut.
Yes, great. Thank you. Did anyone else recognize that?
Sure.
Yeah. What about the younger folks in the crowd?
It's a famous photograph.
Yeah.
And it shows the harassment of a Jew by German soldiers and Polish bystanders.
Great. Thank you. Yeah.
They look happy about it.
Did you see some smiling?
Yeah.
The woman with the child smiling.
Yep. Smiling.
And then
Great.
Also, the person cutting the beard isn't the soldier.
Who is it?
It's
a citizen, I'm assuming it looks like a Polish citizen, the Nazis are there, but they're not doing the cutting.
Great.
I get you what it looks like.
Excellent. So sometimes when I show this photo to American audiences, they have no idea what's going on. They know it's wartime, there's some soldiers, they see the smiling, and they don't necessarily recognize the man in the middle as a Jew. So they really, truly don't know what's happening. Yes?
I would say it also looks really kind of framed or set up because some people are looking directly at the camera.
Yeah.
I mean, was this like a propaganda photo? What was the purpose of the photo?
I don't know what the purpose of the photo was. The photo was taken in 1939 in Poland under German occupation. And the men who are in the photograph have sort of typical Polish university hats on, young Polish people, and they are German soldiers. Yeah, I'm sure it's framed. I mean, you had to take a photo. Yeah.
I think to understand the photo, you need a little bit prior knowledge, and so if you don't know how shameful it is for a man to have his face cut,
Yes.
It wouldn't make that much sense, right?
Right.
It's not real torture,
Right.
but for him it probably is.
Right. So for American students that don't know much about the Holocaust, it's hard to understand. But Polish students like you, easy to identify. They identified the photograph. They saw immediately what was happening with a slight twist. And I want to show you what they said.
I think it's also important. It's 1939, so things are just getting started. And, you know, the Polish non-Jews, not to excuse them, but they don't know what's coming, presumably.
They don't know what's coming, but they're already smiling.
But they're smiling
Yeah.
already, and this is a bad sign.
This is a bad sign. I would agree. And this is extremely common. Photograph scenes like this you can see in films from the ghetto, many films from the ghettos all around Poland. Scenes like this are happening. Public humiliation of Jews, cutting beards, dancing naked, women wearing signs, saying all kinds of things. I'm going to keep moving just so that I can present the research, but thank you. So what I did was I had 188 public school secondary students across 3 regions that varied socially, economically, historically. And there was treatment and control groups. My treatment groups were teachers who I knew taught the Holocaust, who I had met at a Holocaust teacher training program. So I had 3 teachers like that. And then in every school, I also just literally went into classrooms across the hall to teachers, asked them if they taught about the Holocaust. If they said no, I also showed this picture to their students. So I had a mix of different kinds of students, presumably. I did photo elicitation. I showed them 7 photos. I also did some mapping activities, writing activities. We won't talk about those. We'll talk just about the photo elicitation today, where I showed a photo and asked them 3 questions. I asked them, what do you see in the photograph? What do you feel looking at the photograph? And how do you know about this photograph? I wanted to make sure I wasn't giving them any answers. The problem with a lot of surveys is that sometimes you ask a question to a student, who suffered more, Poles or Jews at Auschwitz? And there's too much sort of being suggested to students, I thought, in some of those questions. So I was really trying to have open-ended questions with these 188 Polish students. So here's the photo again. It's a group of Poles being watched by German soldiers. Somebody read it out loud for me. Yes.
I see a man cutting a Jew's beard. There are people around. I think they are Aryans. Among them are soldiers. I think they are German. The Jew has black hair and a beard. The rest look different than him. I think they are cutting the Jew's beard to humiliate him. It was common to gang up on Jews. This shows they were helpless against the tortures of the German army. Similar situations are shown on many films and descriptions about the ghettos.
Okay, so one of the things that is extremely common, this is about the response of something like 63% of my students. 84% are able to identify the Jew. And again, in other audiences with American students who didn't identify a Jew by a beard, this was surprising to them. So let's think about the images that we hold in our heads of Jews and the images that Polish kids hold in their heads of Jews and what that means for our historical knowledge. 58 said it was German, 57% said it was a soldier. Sometimes these terms were paired, sometimes they weren't. 6% saw Poles and civilians. They literally didn't see Poles and civilians when they looked at these photos. So I argue that this is basically what we call a schema, or a common understanding that they've learned both through social education, familial education, and education in schools. 63% of all the students use similar repeated phrases, such as, "It was common German practice to humiliate Jews during World War II." This presents an educational problem for us, right? There was also the conventionalization. These are the images of Jews Polish students get every day. This is a photo from my own personal archive, walking along the streets in Krakow. These little souvenirs are sold everywhere. This is a bag of money, for example. Playing music. There's often also like a beer mug because in some small towns, Jews sort of had the local B&B, bed and breakfast, and sometimes there was a bar there. That's what I've been told, why they're holding a beer mug. But this is from a textbook that I have, where the only picture of Jews in there are either, the camps at Auschwitz or men with beards. So this is what Polish students see. So there's not only a schematization, but also conventionalization of the Jew in the Holocaust in Polish student memory. However, there was a group of students. What happened with the other 30%? What did they see? They experienced dissonance, sort of a tension or clash resulting from the combination of disharmonious things. I also use Barth's idea of punctum, or the moment that a photograph punctures what we know to be true, specifically having to do with photos. But theory aside, of the students who expressed dissonance, and I'll give you examples in the middle, 82% were female. And on a small t-test, an Excel statistical chart, this was actually a significant finding. So I'd have to expand it to find out what's going on there. Felicia, let's have someone read it.
In this photograph I see certainly a Jewish man and soldiers. I wonder though why everyone is smiling except the man in the white shirt. I feel that something bad has happened after this.
Okay, so right there, she sees the smiling. That causes her dissonance. Let's look at Anya. Somebody else. Yes?
A Jew around whom are standing German officers, a few civilians among them, a mother with a child. It is some kind of a family celebration because everyone is happy. But this photo comes from World War II, and actually it unsettles me. It doesn't fit. It's hard for me to say what the situation is.
So this student thinks she knows what's happening. She goes, I think, when I talked with her later, she was like, I think it's a humiliation, but everyone's smiling and there are civilians around. They're not soldiers. What's going on? It doesn't fit. So the students who actually noticed civilians and smiling couldn't believe that Polish civilians would do something bad because it didn't fit their schema. So they experienced dissonance. Barbara, one last one, just for example. I'll read it. I see a Jew whom they are cutting his beard. Everyone around is laughing. This is horrible and inhuman. My feelings are hard to describe because I don't understand what guided these people. What could they have been feeling? Comfort in the pain, humiliation of another being. This, I argue, is a different kind of dissonance, that there are a few students who feel that kind of moral dissonance where they do identify what's happening, they do see what's going on, and then they can't believe. They sort of have almost a little bit of empathy, but it still is dissonance, right? So this is research that leads to more questions, and I'm sort of closing it out now. And these are questions for you and questions that I think about in my practice. Standing on blood-soaked soil, how do we teach about the past, especially when neighbors are involved in killing and hurting other neighbors? When the terms bystander, perpetrator, and victim absolutely don't apply in Poland for some communities. How do we utilize or uproot deeply embedded schema? So this is what I'm working on. Should I be thinking about creating a curriculum of dissonance? Is that the way to break these common narratives about the past? To sort of force kids to face something really difficult? Is that bad? Can we do that as teachers? And what responsibility do we have as history teachers to engage with the bloody past? And how does engagement lead us to help raise active, interested, intelligent citizens of the world? Polish students will get on the internet and they will travel to America and they will come up with an intelligent audience that says those were Polish people cutting the beard of that Jewish man. And they need to be able to say, you know what, that's right, and not to stand in ignorance, right? So how do we do that as a community? I'm not really sure. And that's it.
A few preambles before I begin. One is, and Dr. Crane already acknowledged that we do have several Holocaust survivors in the room with us. I did want to mention by name that Wanda Woloski, Yulia Genina, Lily Bruhl, and Pavel Lichter are here with us this morning. Also, my advisor and co-author of the paper that Dr. Crane just mentioned, Dr. Eliane Rubinstein Avila. Dr. David Jacobs is in the room. He is the son of 2 survivors of the Lodz Ghetto. And also Rabbi Stephanie Aaron, who is a great rememberer in our community. And last, I wanted to just mention, and I'll circulate this book, it's the Diary of Rivka Libsich. It was just published earlier this year. And Rivka was a young Orthodox woman in Lodz, whose diary was recovered by a Soviet medic near the crematoria in Auschwitz-Birkenau, and just published, as I mentioned earlier this year, when one of the descendants of that medic brought the original manuscript to San Francisco. And Jewish Family and Children's Services, an organization in San Francisco, we have one here locally as well, published and did a beautiful rendering of this diary, which I will pass around. I also wanted to mention, like Magda, interestingly, I was formerly an 8th grade history teacher. And since this is an opportunity my first opportunity to be before Dr. Crane's students, I thought I would plug my class as well. If you're interested to continue your studies around the Holocaust, I do teach a course called Jewish Responses to the Holocaust for Judaic Studies. It's JUS 332. So when I began my doctoral studies in language reading and culture in 2010, I at the same time began working on a review of the scholarly literature that addresses Holocaust education in countries around the world. That research took about 3 years, and I'm going to present those findings here in order to place our discussion about Holocaust education in Poland in a global context. Though Poland, of course, presents some unique challenges, as we've already heard. It was the center of Jewish life in Europe before the war, the epicenter of the Holocaust, the site of a massive post-war pogrom, among other things. So learning to remember, the title of today's panel, seemed initially a bit odd to me. Is Holocaust education about learning history, or learning to remember a history that was not experienced by those who are to learn it? And how do you remember something you did not experience? So initially, the title set off my cliche radar. Remember like never again has become part of an empty set of cliches that might make some people feel good, but I think does little to advance the project of Holocaust education. But that mostly applies in the American context. What other histories are we asked to remember? We're not asked to remember Vietnam, but because I'm from Texas, I have been asked to remember the Alamo. So that's the only point of comparison that I can make. After rereading some of Magda's work recently, I realized that in the Polish context, remembrance is not a cliche. Even if today's teachers in Poland did not witness the German occupation, they live with it just as educators in the United States live with our own terrible histories. Decimation of indigenous people, centuries of slavery, institutionalized racism, and American educators should be called on to remember those histories. So I read now, or reread, the title of the program in the Polish context as one that calls on educators in Poland to learn to remember. Why do they have to learn to remember? Because, as we've already heard, they are faced with institutionalized forgetting. And by institutionalized forgetting, I'm referring to nearly half a century of forgetting or misremembering imposed by the Soviet regime and the prevalence of post-war myths that occlude the truth. A useful theoretical frame for an examination of Holocaust education in Poland is the idea of epistemological ignorance. I won't say much about this theory, but when we talk about epistemologies, we are talking about knowledge, how it is developed, sustained, reproduced, what is valued, etc. Epistemological ignorance is the underside of knowledge. It is the intentional and systematic production of ignorance. These epistemic blind spots or gaps in our knowledge make privileged knowers oblivious to systemic injustices. Epistemologies of ignorance, when dealing or not dealing, as it were, with the Holocaust, can result in the maintenance of anti-Semitism as part of the status quo and reinforce or even encourage denial. And I think you saw this in Magda's slide of swastikas in the Jewish cemetery in Lublin. So as I mentioned, I co-authored a paper with my advisor here titled Holocaust Education, Global Forces Shaping Curricula Integration and Implementation. That's a long title, published in the Journal of Intercultural Education in the spring of last year. Here's what we found. From the very beginning, the presentation of this history is stymied by numerous linguistic complexities. I'll mention a few, and I thought that Joanna also alluded to one when she talked about 3 different ways about talking about Łódź or Lodz or Litzmannstadt. The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, which is formerly the Task Force for International Cooperation of Holocaust Education, Remembrance, and Research, identifies 2 main linguistic challenges teachers of this history encounter as they design their units of study. One is, what do we call this event? The one that we call in America the Holocaust. Interestingly, Joanna called it a stereotyped expression, and it is a contested word. Holocaust has biblical connotations as a burnt offering in the biblical context, which can lead to some misunderstandings about a religious rationale for the genocide, or that Jews sacrificed themselves. The phrase final solution is also problematic because that's employing the perpetrator's language. The word Shoah is used in the Hebrew in Israel, also in the French context. Korban, the Yiddish, is one we don't really hear much. So what do we call this word? And beyond the term used to designate this particular history, the definition of the historical period is contested and varies across nations and institutions. So how do we define it? Once we name it, how do we define it? The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance has a definition. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum has a different definition. Yad Vashem, the museum in Jerusalem, has a different definition, as does the Imperial War Museum in London. We, for our paper, used a combination of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, Yad Vashem, and the Imperial War Museum's definitions. And here's what we came up with. The Holocaust refers to a specific genocidal event in the 20th century history, the state-sponsored systematic persecution and annihilation of European Jewry by Nazi Germany and its collaborators between 1933 and 1945. Jews were the primary victims. 6 million were murdered, including 1.5 million children. Millions more were also targeted under Nazi tyranny for decimation, including gypsies, the Roma, the individuals with disabilities, perceived homosexuals, Jehovah's Witness, Soviet prisoners of war, and political dissidents. So once we get through these initial linguistic tangles, we came to our research question, which was, what forces propel, support, challenge, disrupt, or complicate the adoption and implementation of Holocaust education in school curricula around the world? The rationale for writing this paper was that although numerous published articles focus on Holocaust education in particular countries, we did not find a critical review of this body of literature. Here are some of the main themes that emerged from our review. There are a common set of tensions that surround the emergence and implementation of Holocaust education in various countries' national curricula. Holocaust memorialization and institutional support, which were 2 major themes of Joanna's presentation for Holocaust education, are major contributing or shaping forces in the development of Holocaust education in countries around the world. There is great potential for Holocaust education for teaching about genocide, xenophobia, racism, and human rights. The impact of international mass media and the work of nonprofit agencies on the place of Holocaust education in national curricula worldwide was another theme. And there was significant overlap in the conceptual scholarship with regard to these themes. They seep topically into one another. Some of the obstacles before Holocaust education curricula adoption and implementation in various nations. The adoption of Holocaust education curriculum forces nations to confront their own history of anti-Semitism and racism and their treatment of Jews during World War II. Further, studying the Holocaust often forces a nation to confront its own national myths perpetuated after the war, myths that often obscure some ugly truths. So what happens when you attempt to engage in an honest reckoning with the history of the Holocaust and are confronted by entrenched national mythologies? We compared this to this disorienting effect of peering into a distorted mirror, a mirror that shows you that which you don't care to see. One example, in the Czech Republic, historians were forced to consider how to reconstruct the national narrative after the collapse of the communist regime in 1989. How were they to incorporate the Holocaust in the early 1990s into textbooks where the traditional descriptions of Czech World War II history centered on Nazi persecution of the Czech nation and Czech resistance to that persecution and occupation? The sense of national persecution and the history of German occupation complicates educational efforts in every nation. In Poland, a 2010 article by Milewski states, and I'm quoting here, "The dual social complexities of victim and witness status have neutralized the remembrance of the Holocaust and its presence in school education." And last, Holocaust education requires nations to examine difficult themes in the nation's history, including the historic treatment of minority groups, immigration policies and exclusion, and colonial and post-colonial histories, including the human rights abuses that accompany these periods, just to name a few. Here are some of the forces surrounding the implementation of Holocaust education. I'm going to talk just about the work of some nonprofits and the role of mass media. Facing History in Ourselves, which is an organization here in the United States based out of Massachusetts, the Memorial de la Shoah, the Paris Holocaust Museum, which has a traveling exhibition on display in Tucson currently downtown at the Jewish History Museum, which is next door to the Holocaust History Center that Dr. Crane mentioned a few moments ago. I encourage you all, those who aren't being taken there by Dr. Crane, to visit while it's here until through January of next year. There's also the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum here in Washington, D.C., the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam, Jewish institutions across the world, including the Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw, museums, etc. International mass media, and I'll go through just decade by decade very quickly, and the role of mass media following the end of the war. Of course, beginning with the publication of the Diary of Anne Frank in English in 1952, republication of Primo Levi's Survival in Auschwitz in 1958, international broadcast of the Eichmann trial, and Hannah Arendt's reportage on that trial in the New Yorker in 1961, later the publication of her book, The Banality of Evil, which is one of the most complicated and argued about texts of the 20th century. The NBC broadcast of the Holocaust miniseries in 1978, that was a miniseries that so watered down the experiences of Holocaust survivors that many survivors mark watching that miniseries as their impetus for beginning to speak about their own experiences to set the record straight. Publication of the graphic novel Mouse, this is 1986 by Art Spiegelman. Also in 1986 was the release of Claude Lanzmann's 10-hour documentary film Shoah. That was a documentary that revolutionized the genre of documentary filmmaking, and I will end this list, which is by no means exhaustive, with the year 1993, which is when the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum opened its doors, and Steven Spielberg released the film Schindler's List, which, when it was broadcast here in the United States for the first time, was viewed in 65 million homes. That's the largest broadcast ever, non-sports broadcast. That's the largest audience for a non-sporting event ever in American broadcast history. One lingering question, a question of rationale. Does Holocaust education primarily involve learning about history or learning from history? Is it about learning about the Jews or learning about the Nazis, other victims of Nazi policies, or, and I'm adding this myself, learning about ourselves? How am I doing on time?
Close to a couple minutes.
Okay, I'll just wrap up here by talking about memorialization, something that Joanna spoke quite a bit about. A few examples of memorialization efforts around the world. In 1951, the Israeli Knesset, that's the parliament in Israel, declared Yom HaShoah, the 27th of Nisan, to align with the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. This is the annual remembrance to the 6 million Jews murdered. There's a 2-minute siren and silence across Israel. In January of 2000, governments of 44 nations met in Stockholm under the auspices of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance and declared January 27th as International Holocaust Memorial Day, memorializing the 1945 liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau. In the US, we recognize both International Holocaust Memorial Day, January 27th, and what we call Days of Remembrance, as established by Congress and to align with Yom HaShoah. Holocaust education curricula worldwide tend to coincide with or have some interface with these memorial days. And I'll end with talking about the possibilities for human rights and Holocaust education, where those things align and intersect and align. Holocaust education is likely to lead to an examination of broader themes of human rights and racism. Much of the Holocaust education curriculum materials that have been examined broach these grand topics, but provide little in the way of direction for teachers on how to effectively wrap these themes into units of study. And more recently, political considerations that complicate Holocaust education include a nation's relationship with the State of Israel. And following the events of this summer, you might imagine how difficult it might be for teachers to teach about the Holocaust, this vast, complex topic, without simultaneously opening another complex and charged topic, discussion about the State of Israel. I will end there.